Hey, this is Brianne of MyNameIsBrianne.com, and today I'm really excited to welcome you to this recorded conversation with Sam Nordberg. Sam is a learning professional who specializes in train the trainer materials. Her clients include the Royal Australian Air Force, and what she does is help those people who she's working with translate what's in their head in a way that's going to make sense to their end clients and their end students. We talk about things like how adult learners differ from children and what the most important thing is that you need to keep in mind when you are preparing for your own training. I can't wait to hear what you think of this conversation. So tune in for the next about 15 minutes or so, and when you're done, make sure you leave a comment below to share what your biggest insightful moment was. So Sam, thank you so much for joining us.
No, thank you so much for having me. And I'm going to absorb a little bit of the cold through the webcam because it's about 38 degrees here and about 100% humidity. So I'm really keen for a little bit of winter.
I think we could probably average out our temperatures and come to something that we would both be quite pleased with.
Yeah, something comfortable for all parties somewhere
That's
in the middle.
Right. So Sam, why don't you just give us
something comfortable for all parties somewhere
That's
in the middle.
Right. So Sam, why don't you just give us a little bit of background about who you are as an instructional designer, how you came to where you're at now, and that sort of thing.
Yeah, so I'll give you the short version. I actually had no intention of doing it to begin with, and I came from a background of sales and retail management. So for many, many years, I'd been in the big box retail market. I'd managed huge stores and hundreds of employees, and sales was my background. That's what I'd always done. And I loved it. I was that really sad person who enjoyed working in retail. And unfortunately, I got to a point where I no longer believed in the morals and the ethics of the company I was working for. And I had to get out. And what I realized when I was at that transition stage was actually I didn't have a background in sales. I had a background in training. I just never realized it. But every time that you manage a group of people, you're training. You're teaching them how to follow sales procedure. You're teaching them how to do things. You're teaching your customers how to buy from you on a daily basis. And so my entire history, which I thought was sales and retail, was really just training. And that was a really good realization for me, which was that was the bit I loved. And then now I can use all of those different experiences to create what I do now.
And you went from there and got some additional education to help you kind of learn how to take all of this stuff that you were doing intuitively and then kind of supercharge it with some of the academic knowledge about how people learn and that sort of thing.
Yeah, definitely. So I kind of accidentally fell into a job with a large training company here. And accidentally, because I had no qualifications, I had no experience, and they just kind of went, well, give it a go. And I'm like, all right. So it really was a complete accident. And I got my first qualifications with them. And I worked with them for a long time, training their trainers and developing all of their material. And then, yeah, off the back of that, I went, well, I should probably have some sort of paperwork to back this up maybe. And at that point, I went and got my dual diplomas in training and in the design and development process.
How did you find that what you were learning through that training, getting your official papers and stuff, how did that change and evolve your approach to designing training for clients?
It worked two ways. I love learning, and I've always loved learning. So for me, it was really great to be on the receiving end of training instead of on the giving end again, because it's so refreshing to sit as a student and to watch what someone else does and how they do it. So for me, it was some really good reminders about what I was doing well, but where my gaps laid as well. But the other thing I've often found, and I don't know if it's the same in sort of formal qualifications elsewhere in the world, but it is here, is that they teach you how to do a certain thing a certain way in a box. And I like to get to the end of the course and go, well, that was lovely. Now let's do it my way. So I like to take little bits of what I learned and then a little bit of what I know works better and sort of meld it all together.
So it's basically real world meets classroom. That's the approach that you try to bring when you're doing this train the trainer work.
Yeah, and that's the approach I have used with any of our really big clients as well, because a lot of them are teaching things that I know nothing about, but that are quite robust or quite dangerous. I've worked with weapons instructors and those kinds of things, so they have to be very realistic about the training they're going to be doing because it involves live firearms, and they can't be perfect world.
Let's dig into that a little bit. You mentioned, just before we started recording here, that one of the training opportunities that you've been involved with is the Royal Australian Air Force and the Defense Department and that sort of thing. And that's got to be a tricky place to be providing train the trainer in, because I mean you've got a captive audience that maybe they don't even necessarily want to be there. They know it's important, but there are things they would rather be doing.
Yeah, very much so. So yeah, I've done a fair bit of work over the last 2 years with the Royal Australian Air Force, and I've trained hundreds of their trainers now to set in my classrooms. But you're right. So my audience, I reckon, is about 50%. This is cool. I really want to learn this, and 50%. My boss told me I had to be here. So it makes it a little bit hard to balance the motivation level and the emotion of the room, and I have to work quite hard on planning the emotion of the class, not just planning the content, because otherwise it can just go into all sorts of places it shouldn't be.
So
the other thing,
sorry, I was just going to ask, so when you're trying to plan the content and you have that in mind, what are some examples of how you might make adaptations to allow for that, to keep people engaged, who maybe are less engaged or at worst are disengaged?
Yeah, so I use some of my familiar tactics, which is asking lots of engaging questions and getting them to share their experiences that they're proud of or that they've enjoyed doing, because people love talking about themselves. Always have. So, I mean, that's always the basics, the way to go. But normally what I do when I plan content is you have to understand, of course, that people can't say this engaged an entire course. Mm-hmm. It's not humanly possible to be that actively engaged. So you understand when you plan your content, it's going to be sort of highs and then dips and then highs and then dips. So what we do then is we use the dips as downtime where I would build activities into the class, and sometimes physical activities. If I've got a group of students who are infantry, for example, and spend their days running around with packs and guns, they don't want to sit in my classroom for 7 days straight. It drives them insane. So we'll go outside and find some sort of external activity where we can embed training into what they would do in their daily life, and they can give me examples of how that would work for them.
That makes so much sense. Both of the things that you said there, the two tips basically of get people talking about themselves, make what they're learning reflective of their own experience, get them talking about how it impacts them and how it can make a difference for them. So it's not just some abstract theoretical concept up here. You're actually bringing it and actually having them bring it down to the nuts and bolts. This is how this is going to affect me, and then to be really knowing who is in the room with you. And that applies whether it's a physical room or a virtual room, knowing who's in the room with you. And yeah, if you've got people who, they're used to being active and up and going all the time, allowing for that in your planning and even leveraging that in your planning is a hugely valuable strategy.
I find that that's one of the most vital things I've ever learned about training, which is it's got nothing to do with me and everything to do with them. And if you don't understand your learner and how much they know and what they like and what they don't like, you can talk to a brick wall for as much as you like, but it's not going to go anywhere. So you have to know them and you have to leverage their existing skills. And with my job especially, I know nothing about what they do at all. Like, I train their driver trainers and their mechanics. So, but you're talking to the girl who barely even puts fuel in her own car. Like, I don't know. So I have to leverage their experience because I've got none.
So how do you approach that when you're coming at this place where technically they're the expert more than you are? How do you approach this is something that we often hear from people who are trying to build online businesses and that sort of thing, which I know is a community that you're also familiar with.
Yeah.
And they say, well, I'm not expert enough. I can't teach this. I just can't. So how do you approach that when you're going into this room and you've got people who are way more expert in their thing than you are? What do you tell yourself?
They're way more expert in lots of things than I am. First of all, I normally crack myself as I'm about to walk in the door and hyperventilate for a little bit. And then once I'm past that, no, all I have to remember is that I know what I know, which is very different from what they know. So yes, they're an expert in their field, but they don't understand how to take the knowledge out of their head and put that in any kind of course structure yet. So I'm kind of the vessel that shows them how to take stuff out of here and put it onto paper. And that's what I tell them. And the thing that has always saved me is I just make it very clear when I enter that I respect their experience and I don't ever try to take away from what they know, which is much, much more than what I do. And all I do is make it very clear that I understand they're an expert in their field, so they have to understand that I know my stuff too. And I'm there to help them. In a private world, in the civilian world, I'm there to help them monetize what they do. Mm-hmm. And in the defense world, I'm there to help them train everyone else coming through behind them.
Mm-hmm. Now, I'm sure it's probably come up more than once where you get some people who say, well, I have, I've been training for however long and I've got experience and I know what I'm doing. And why do you think you can help me? Like, who are you to tell me how to teach? Or, I went to school for 12 or 15 or however many years. I know what good teaching is and bad teaching is. How do you respond to that?
Have you been in my classroom? Pretty sure you've sat at the back. One of the things here in Australia is that the training qualification is different to the teaching qualification. So I get a lot of teachers who've been in the school system for, 20 years. And then if they want to transition to the training system, they have to come and sit my class. And as you can imagine, if you've been employed teaching students for 20 years, you don't necessarily want me to tell you how to teach. So I always have to approach the subject in finding out how much they know already. And then we just work around the gaps. And I think that's vital with whatever you've trained, is that the more you can find out about your students at the beginning and how much they know and what they've got going on, the easier everything's going to be. But until you know that, and until you've given them an opportunity to share that, which they like to share, you're not going to get very far.
Right. You said something really interesting there that I thought was something maybe to go into a little further. And you mentioned in passing the difference between training and teaching. Tell me more about how you see that difference.
This is a hard one because the words mean different things to different people. Mm-hmm. So here in Australia, I have to go on sort of the technical term, which is they're two different industries. Mm-hmm. And teaching is what we call the school system, so from ages 5 to 17. And that's a university education, that's a certain degree, and that sits over there. And then training is the word that we use to describe adult education. So not university as such, but the vocational, so teaching someone how to do a job. Mm-hmm. And that's the terminology we use. Now, that's not to say those are the words that everyone uses worldwide, but that's the difference here. So teaching and training are really just two qualification backgrounds, but the biggest difference, I believe, when you define them that way, is that teaching is for children and training is for adults, and they are different beings. They do not process the same way, they don't want to learn the same way, they don't necessarily engage the same way. Yes, there are some similarities, but they are not the same.
And that's something that I think, to go to the earlier point we were talking about is, well, I went to school for 12 or however many years, and clearly I know what it means to be taught. Exactly what you've said there, though, those were experiences that we had as children or as growing into young adults. And our brains, we know our brains literally change as we grow. And so it's naive to believe that we would process information in exactly the same way when we're, a child as compared to an adult. What are some of the big differences? I mean, I know there's lots of research on
Yeah.
pedagogy versus andragogy and all of that, but in your experience, what are some of the key differences when you're dealing with adult learners?
I think the biggest thing I have to remember is that they come in knowing stuff already. So when you are dealing with a child, they're quite a blank slate. And you can pretty much tell them anything, and if they respect you enough, they'll believe you. So you can tell a room full of grade 1 kids that the earth is flat. And they'd probably go home and go, hey, Mom, Dad, the earth is flat. Because, that's okay. And they believe everything that being at the front of the room is telling them. When with a room full of adult students, if I tell them the earth is flat, they'd laugh at me or throw things at me. Depends on how much they dislike it. So I have to understand that even if I know I'm right in something or I know my way is better, that they've possibly got 10, 20, 30 years of life experience that says otherwise. And sometimes the biggest thing about adult training is you have to break a lot of habits or a lot of beliefs before you can start training your training.
And there's an aspect of psychology behind that too, right? It's about understanding how does behavior change happen and how can we be persuasive and that sort of thing as well.
Yeah, and as opposed to with children where it's a much simpler sort of external reward system, dangle the golden carrot kind of a reward system. With adults, you have to understand they have a whole heap of different internal motivators already. So I can dangle a carrot, but if they don't like carrots, they're not going to go for it. It's about really understanding the difference in what goes on up here for them, and there's a hell of a lot going on up there for them sometimes, and working out, what that means.
And really what that comes back to is the same thing that I preach all the time, and I've been hearing you say throughout this conversation is you have to know who is in the room. And again, that's a physical room or a virtual room or some combination thereof. You have to know who is in that room so that you can meet them where they're at and address things in such a way that they're going to be receptive to it and be able to fit it into their existing worldview.
Yeah, so true. And I was always a firm believer that they don't want to learn what you want to teach them. They want to learn what they want to learn. They don't care what you want to teach. They know where their gaps are, they know what their problems are, and they want that solution. I can sit here and preach perfect world solutions till I'm blue in the face, but if they don't want it, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And this is a case where, it's just like you asked, do you sit in the back of my classroom? For me, it's, have you listened to what I've been saying in all of my private conversations for the last several months? Because that's exactly what I say is no one cares what you want to teach. They only care what they want to learn. And I think that really encapsulates the whole conversation that we've been having and kind of puts a bow on it as a really nice thought to leave people with is when you're preparing training, whether it's you're creating an online program or you're doing a workshop or a seminar or you're doing train the trainer work or working directly with adult students, it doesn't matter what the context is. The principle of knowing who those people are is the fundamental foundation that everything else then gets built on top of. So Sam, thank you so much for sharing your time with us today and telling us about your experience and all of that. If people want to connect with you more, how can they do that? Where can they find you online?
Well, the best thing to do is to head to www.samnordberg, and Nordberg is terrible to spell. I apologize, but I'm sure that we'll give you some information in the links below. And I spend far too much time on Facebook, where I'm supposed to be productive. So hunt me down there and I'll probably be there.
All right. That sounds fantastic. Thank you again so much for joining us. And, for everyone who's watching this, make sure if you're watching this on YouTube, click the links below, come and head on over to Sam's site and to my site. My site is mynameisbrianne.com. And if you think Nordberg is hard to spell, try spelling Brianne, because there's about 1 million spellings of that. So those links will be below this video. And if you hop on to the site, make sure you leave a comment, a question for Sam or myself, and we would be more than happy to answer your questions and continue the conversation with you on the other side. So thank you so much for watching this video and tuning in, and we will continue the conversation in the comments.
Thank you for having me.